Graduated in 1984. I subsequently did my training in oral and maxillofacial surgery as a resident in Detroit, Michigan, at Sinai Hospital, Detroit, which consists of oral surgical procedures, 6 months of medicine rotation, 6 months of general surgery rotation, and 6 months of anesthesia over a 4-year period of time.
Okay, so that's, even though you didn't go to medical school, that's residency consistent with regular medical doctors?
Right. I participated as a medical intern for 6 months and as general surgery first-year PGY1 resident in general surgery, doing everything from appendectomies to chest trauma, gunshot wounds to the chest, head and neck trauma, and then anesthesia on everything from open heart procedures to breast biopsies.
Okay. How long have you been practicing as a oral and maxillofacial surgeon?
I've been in here in this state practicing on Rainbow and Oakey for the past approximately 25 years.
And do you have any affiliations with hospitals?
Yes, currently I'm on staff at Sunrise Hospital Center, which is a trauma center, University Medical Center, which is a trauma center, and also through Sunrise, I'm also on at Mountain View and Southern Hills.
And do you have any regular on-call days with any of these hospitals?
I'm on call at Sunrise for approximately 1 week each month, and those kind of filter in the Mountain View Hospital and Southern Hills Hospital trauma. It's transferred to Sunrise. And University Medical Center I'm also on for the past 25 years, a week at a time.
A full week, not just a
full week
weekend.
at a time, yeah, 7 days straight.
Okay. So, and those aren't, on the days you're on call at one hospital, you're not on call at the other?
They sometimes may overlap if I have to cross cover for colleagues or things like that, but it's possible that it could happen.
But for the most part?
For the most part, they're
scheduled.
separate, yes.
And, okay, do you engage in continuing education?
Yes. There's 60 hours. I have a dental license in the state of Nevada, and they require over the biennium 60 hours of continuing education. But I usually go above and beyond that, probably closer to 100 hours.
All right, and biennium, you mean every 2 years?
Yes.
Do you have any, have you done facial surgeries?
Yes.
All right, are you familiar with something called a blowout fracture?
Yes.
And can you describe what that is, please?
A blowout fracture is an indirect fracture of the orbital floor, which is sustained by blunt force trauma to the zygoma.
Okay.
I can demonstrate.
Before you demonstrate, in regular lay speak, is that some type of hit to the cheek causes the eye socket sort of to fracture?
Yes, it's a basic shattering of the floor of the orbit, which is comprised of a very thin layer of bone.
Okay, and the orbit is what's around the eye?
Right. The orbital walls are consisting of bone that is very thin, and it basically keeps the eye in place.
Okay. And the what's called a blowout fracture, which sounds really bad, are those fairly common?
It's very common. I've literally seen hundreds. I would say every day that I'm on call, I get one, at least.
And in terms of fights, fist fights, are they sort of one of the more common injuries?
Yes, it is.
And are they considered are they considered to be very serious injuries?
In the grand scale of things, unless there's certain conditions that the person has, they really do not require any surgical intervention. It's just an observation type thing and some detailed instructions that they must follow.
Okay. Can you show us your skull to demonstrate this, please? I mean, not your skull, the skull you have
you're
with
looking
us.
at it. So basically, the orbital floor is the bone. I'm not sure, do you want me to show it to a particular area or person?
Can you show it to the jury?
So the bone that is under the eyeball is the orbital floor. And a blowout fracture is a disruption of the bony layer underneath the eyeball. And it's basically as thin as a piece of paper. And the shock wave that's created by a blunt force trauma to the cheekbone causes what's called an indirect fracture. In other words, where the blunt trauma takes place, it is not fractured, it's beyond that. It's like an earthquake where the pulsation that goes on this thin paper-like bone is basically broken.
There was one more, I'm sorry, I know I'm jumping around. There was one more foundational question I wanted to ask you. Not as a treating doctor, but have you ever testified, as you are here, as an expert witness?
Yes, on other particulars.
Okay.
Of my own patient, I have, and also I was asked to be an expert for a different type of injury, a TMJ injury.
TMJ is lockjaw.
It's basically this little bone here that's connected to it's the temporal mandibular joint.
Okay. All right. So, did you review some medical records, X-ray films, and associated documents for an individual named Christine McAday?
Yes, I did.
And did you also review Ms. McAday's testimony?
The video that was provided to me.
Okay, what appeared to be from these cameras?
Yes.
And there was, without breaks, there was like 6 or 8 hours of it. Did you watch the whole thing?
Yes.
Okay. And did we provide you any reports or pictures to review?
Yes, I saw the photos that you provided along with the Sunrise Hospital. I believe it was a 2-day stay.
Okay.
All those records.
And I'm trying to remember, but I think you said it was like about 300 pages worth of medical records. Am I
It's
correct?
like 215 pages, something like that.
215, okay.
Yeah, something.
And you took a look at all of those?
Yes.
All right, one thing I wanted to ask you was, did you take a look at her tox screen upon entry into the hospital?
I looked at all the records and I did review her blood labs.
Okay, and was she positive for any drugs?
The only one that was positive was opiates.
All right. And I'm sorry, you said you reviewed all of the records plus the films, meaning the x-rays?
The x-rays I obtained on my own.
Okay. And you're able to read x-rays?
Yes.
And you also, did you also read the conclusions of is it a radiologist?
Radiologist? Yes.
Yeah, okay. And so the question I had wanted to ask you was, are the injuries that Ms. McAday sustained to her face consistent with 2 blows in rapid succession?
I believe that is very possible.
Okay. Can you explain why? Using your skull, if you like.
Well, the trauma that occurred, as you could see, on the photographs, I don't know specifically which ones you want to refer to, but the left eye was closed shut along with ecchymosis or bruising under the eyes. That bruising can be as a result of nasal bone fractures and the actual orbital floor. when the orbital floor fractures, what happens is air from the sinus leaches into the orbital contents, which is consisting of fat, muscle, and the globe or eyeball itself. That air you could plainly see on the x-ray along with all the swelling that takes place. Usually if somebody just breaks their nose, they just get black eyes. It's not it's swollen. And the right eye, I didn't really appreciate any swelling, but you could see the redness and the swelling on the left side from the photos.
Okay, so that redness and swelling on the left side, is that consistent with a perhaps a right hand to the cheek?
Yeah. Usually what happens is individuals such as in bar fights and things like that, you could kind of tell whether the assailant was right hand or left hand by what side of the face it occurred, the trauma occurred. So yes, hitting like a fist that's pretty big, and this is a male skull, but a smaller male, and a fist can compromise a lot of space, and you know, hitting the cheekbone in here would make that wave of force, you know, propagate down through the floor of the orbit, which would shatter from just like a very thin piece of glass.
Okay, so in layman's terms, fist hitting the cheek will cause the bones under the eye to fracture.
Yes.
All right, and did you note another traumatic injury to the face consistent with what would be a left hand?
No, I couldn't really tell you for sure if it was.
Oh, it could have been a right and then a right?
It could have, depending on how people move their face, you know, in relation to the oncoming projectile.
Okay, fair enough. Did you see another area that appeared to be another blunt force strike to the face, possibly a fist?
Yes. The other injury was a dental injury, which is consistent with somebody being hit right in the middle of the face, which could, that one injury, that one blunt force trauma could actually cause fractures in the nose, along with fractures of the teeth in front, which was evident from some of the swelling in her lip. And one of the pictures I could see that her tooth was dislodged inferiorly or down further than the rest of her teeth.
Okay. So when I asked you earlier, are the injuries consistent with two hits, one to the cheek and one to the center? Your answer was yes?
That would be correct.
Okay, and that's basically what you just explained there?
Yes.
And that includes the missing teeth, the broken nose, and then on the other side, the orbital fracture?
Well, the teeth were accounted for. They were the tooth number 8, the right central incisor, was avulsed somewhat, and it was placed back into position.
Okay, what is avulsed?
It was hanging down.
Okay. And you've seen the pictures. There was extensive lip swelling.
Yes.
And is that consistent with that blow to the center of the face?
Yes.
And would you describe the face as very vascular?
It's very easy to bruise your face. People get what's called a fat lip by just, you know, simply being, you know, banged. I've seen people have their teeth knocked out from kids, like babies, headbutting their babysitters. It happens.
Okay. And I was actually speaking to the more general, is it fair to say that the pictures of Ms. McInday showed a lot of swelling throughout her face?
Yes.
And is that still, all of that swelling still consistent with two hits, one to the cheek, one to the middle, the sort of teeth, lower nose?
It's very difficult to determine the number of hits from the result of blunt force trauma, but it could be consistent with only 2.
All right, then if there were other hits in other areas to the face, Would those leave some evidence?
I would imagine that any area with significant blunt force trauma would have a resultant underlying injury, more extensive than the skin swelling, depending on the forces involved. It takes a great deal of force to break a bone.
All right, and so if there was more leaving no marks, they would have to be very light hits?
One could conclude that. It's possible.
And is it also possible that the two major areas of injury were from hits in excess of 2?
It would be possible, but the probability of somebody holding still to be hit exactly in the same place twice would be very unusual.
If someone was hit in the same places on their face, say, over 10 times, let's say by someone with twice their size or 1.5 times their size plus fighting training, would you expect the injuries to be more significant than they were?
There's been studies over the years. The average boxer has a force of a punch of 800 pounds. And that it actually coincides with a zygomatic fracture or orbital floor fracture. It takes a lot more force to break other bones. It is difficult to say with any certainty that who is average as a boxer and what type of forces are generated. And also the probability of somebody holding still, like I mentioned earlier, to have that exact same blunt force trauma placed on the exact same place is pretty unusual, as people who basically will resist. Nobody's going to hold still to get hit. When they see it coming, they're obviously going to try to get out of the way. So the probability of hitting it in the same exact place over and over again is pretty unusual.
Okay, and then moreover, would you expect if the person is hit in the same place over and over again, that those areas would have more extensive injuries?
I would imagine.
And I know the photos look bad, but are these injuries in the maxillofacial, I don't know, in terms of a maxillofacial point of view, are these injuries significant?
Looking at the injuries, the only procedures I would have done would be to place her teeth back into position. There wouldn't be any surgical intervention necessary. I could outline to you what I would recommend.
Go, please.
So usually these injuries, the number one thing we're concerned about is infection, because we're communicating the sinus, which is a hollow cavity above the teeth and below the eye, with the oral cavity, sinus, which is filled with bacteria. So if somebody were to blow their nose, they would basically push air into this dead space around the eye, make their eye swell. You could actually have somebody blow their nose and their eye will puff up. That air in that tissue will allow infection to set up. So as a result of that, we place the patients on antibiotics for 2 weeks, and we tell them not to blow their nose for at least 2 to 6 weeks to prevent air from escaping into the surrounding eye structures.
Let me stop you there for a second. In your review of Ms. McInday's medical records, was she prescribed antibiotics?
I did not see that.
And was she, did you see anything in the discharge paperwork or something like that?
I did see the discharge paperwork, but while she was there the initial day, I believe she did get antibiotics. Dr. Orr was the the oral surgeon who saw her that day, and in his note, the recommendations did not include antibiotics.
Okay. Are you familiar with Dr. Orr?
Yes.
And So, okay, so that would be one of your recommendations. Would you have any other recommendations?
I also place a patient on decongestants because they can't blow their nose. And it takes about 6 weeks for that tissue to heal up enough to kind of hermetically seal the sinus so there's no leakage around the area. And then I follow them every week. I see them every week. Now, things that I look for in case I do have to surgically intervene is something, normally, the only time that we intervene surgically is when somebody has their orbital contacts sink into the sinus. In other words, the hole is so big that the orbit goes down into the sinus, and one eye's further in than the other. And as a result of that, you have double vision. The other entity can occur is something called entrapment, which is what the radiologist mentioned in his note, where there's a fragment of bone that kind of latches on to the inferior rectus or a muscle under the eye, and that muscle is impaired in its movement. So when somebody tries to look up, it won't go up. They can't look up. So they see double vision also. So I look for those things to take place because the swelling, because it's so immense, because of all the surrounding orbit, can actually push the eyeball up for like a month and keep that eyeball in place where it will not produce double vision. But if I see them every week, I could see that slowly they start to develop. I check all fields of vision to make sure that they're not seeing double. And as time goes by, if they start to see double, then that's when it's time to surgically intervene.
Okay. And was there surgical intervention in the eye socket, the so-called blowout fracture?
I'm not sure because the records I reviewed were just Sunrise Hospital records.
All right. If Ms. McInday testified to 4 oral surgeries and 1 nose surgery, would that be consistent with what you saw?
No, it wouldn't be consistent with the orbit
Okay.
because it technically could be, if it's oral surgery, usually people say, it's my teeth.
It's her teeth.
If it's like trauma surgery or maxillofacial type surgery, which most people won't say, but they'll usually say I had eye surgery. So
Okay.
from
So-
that, I can't, it's probably due to the teeth. She may have needed root canal treatments, stabilization of the fragments of the teeth that were dislodged. And the other incidental that the surgery on the nose, there was 2 fractures. And I don't know if people would say that that was oral surgery or they said that I had my nose fixed. So,
I believe she said she had her nose fixed and then
Right.
4 surgeries on her teeth.
right,
Is that's basically what you just
Yes.
were talking about?
yes.
Was first of all, there's been testified that there were 18 broken bones in her face. Is that possible?
No.
How many bones are there on the face?
And that's a good question. I haven't counted lately. It's about 8. I can name them off, I guess.
Sure.
So we got the mandible, the maxilla, the vomer, the palatal bone, the nasal bones, the frontal bone, the sphenoid bone, and the zygoma. So I didn't count. How many was that?
I didn't.
You were saying 8.
Okay.
Oh, okay, there you go.
So, yeah. I haven't counted lately. Sorry, I wasn't up on my...
No, that's all right. You were able to name them. That's just as good. Did you reviewed the X-rays? You said.
Yes.
All right. Were you able to see 18 breaks?
No.
Did you count the breaks?
Well, she has the orbital floor, which was fractured. That's one bone. The other was the nasal bone, which is overlying the bridge of the nose.
Mm-hmm.
There was, if they're talking about what's called comminution, is like multiple fractures in one bone. Okay, yes, there were multiple fractures in one bone. Did I count them? No. But the orbital floor was broken into several pieces. It's like a shattered piece of glass, like I described earlier.
Okay.
The nasal bone was similar. On top, the vomer, which is above the palate, that was broken in one spot, but it also had a deviation in it that was there before the fracture. It was like a deviated septum, if anyone has heard of that term. That's what she had before the injury.
Okay, so, so in terms of, well, let me ask the question this way. Was the surgery on the nose medically necessary outside the deviated septum?
It's a difficult question to ask because I'm not aware of her post-traumatic symptoms. If someone has difficulty breathing through their nose, I didn't get any of that from any of the descriptions that I reviewed. So it could be purely cosmetic. It could be the fact that she did have like difficulty breathing through one side or the other. Mm-hmm. I'm not exactly sure.
Okay. And you didn't review actual records of the surgery?
I don't have any access to any records of surgery. The only surgery, the only record that I have was the hospital stay.
Was what we,
Yes.
the ones that, okay.
Yes.
And you would agree, though, the surgeries to correct the teeth were necessary?
Yes.
All right. And 4 surgeries are consistent with what is necessary?
I honestly feel that it could have probably been done in 2. One, to place the teeth into position, and the second one is to remove all the hardware once they're in place.
Okay.
I really don't think it would require 4, but if she's counting like root canal treatments per tooth or what have you, that could be another procedure. If she's talking about the restoration of the teeth, that could be another procedure. So I'm not exactly sure what she means by that.
All right. And then just real quick, in terms of reviewing her records, you noticed a fairly small lacerated liver and a fairly large bruise on her thigh?
Yes.
Her being Ms. McInday?
Yes.
Are those potentially consistent with one kick each, one kick to the side and one kick to the leg?
It's difficult for me to really give you an expert testimony on that because I'm an oral surgeon, but I've seen trauma before, and it's possible that those type of things could happen.
Did I miss anything? I don't think so. Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
Ask the witness.
Thank you. Good afternoon, doctor.
Hi.
It's possible it could be 10 kicks to the leg.
It's possible.
It's possible it could be 100 kicks to the leg.
It's possible.
There is absolutely no way that you can tell how many kicks were to that leg.
No.
And there's
no.
absolutely no way you can tell how many punches were done to that face.
No.
So when you say it's possible, I mean, I could tell you it's possible she was hit 150 times, and you would say it's possible.
Yes.
So the fact that you're saying it's possible too, that it was 2, I mean, I could literally say any number to you, and you could say it was possible.
Yes.
There are so many different variables that play in to someone having injuries. For instance, the amount of force that the person hitting them uses. Is that true?
That's correct.
Maybe the strength of the individual who is doing the hitting.
Which is similar.
Whether it's an open hand or a closed fist.
Yes.
The distance between the 2 individuals.
Possibly.
Whether the individual being hit is unconscious.
That would have a lot to do with it.
Whether the individual who's being hit is basically laying down on their back, pinned down, not able to move.
I would imagine.
If you are being beaten repeatedly for 2 hours, and I'm not saying the entire 2 hours you're being hit, you know, I'm just
Right.
saying intermittently throughout the 2 hours, are you saying that you wouldn't look like the way Miss McInday looked?
No, I was saying that the injuries that were sustained could be consistent with only 2 hits. That's the only thing I really was commenting on. I can't really say the number of blows. I can't really say whether she moved. I can't say anything about the distance between the people or how much force was used per blow.
So I think the only thing you would be able to say with certainty is that she was at least hit once. Is that fair?
She was hit more than once from the injuries.
But anything past that would be you absolutely guessing.
I would have no idea.
Did you write a report in preparation for coming here?
No.
Okay.
No.
Now, you were hired by the defense, correct?
Yes.
And then are you paid a certain amount of money to review the materials?
I was, yes.
And is that like an hourly fee? How does that work?
It's an hourly fee.
And then are you paid a certain amount of money to actually come in and testify?
Yes.
And so then what would your total bill be for all of those things?
I actually don't have that with me. My office staff took care of that.
Okay. Do
So-
you know how much you charge?
I think it's like $1,000 an hour for the review of the records.
And how long did it take you to review?
I spent an hour reading the Sunrise Hospital, and to watch those videos, it was like 8 hours. It was a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then to come in here and testify, is that count while you're on the stand or while you're waiting? Does it count the entire time you've been here at the
I
courthouse?
took off my day to be here at 1:30 to give testimony. So,
Okay.
yeah, it adds up. It's expensive.
So now we're at over $12,000?
I'm not sure.
So it'd be 8 hours of video, right? Is that yes?
Yes.
And it'd be $1,000 an hour for that.
Yes.
And then you said it was about $1,000 for you to, it was about 1 hour for you to review the records,
Right.
which would be up to $9,000, is that right?
Sounds right.
And then you've been here now for over 3 hours, which would
Right.
be an extra $3,000.
Right.
So then we're close to $12,000.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure of the amount, but
Okay. And then what materials were you provided? You said you saw the videos. What else?
I had the videos, I had the Sunrise Hospital records, and I have access to the radiographs, the CT scan of the face, and that's the only one that I looked at.
But I'm sorry, and did you say this, the actual medical records besides the...
Yes.
You were able to look at those?
Yes.
Okay. You stated that Miss McInday was positive for opiates. Did you see in the records where she was administered morphine at 5:22 a.m. before her arrival?
I did not.
Okay. If she
No.
was administered morphine at 5:22 a.m., that would show positive for opiates at the hospital, is that correct?
Yes, it would.
Would that surprise you that someone with those types of injuries would be given morphine?
Not at all.
Were you able to look at her preliminary hearing testimony or just the testimony from the videos for trial?
Just the videos.
Now, you never treated Miss McInday,
Never.
and you've never spoken with her.
Never.
She was treated by Dr., I believe is it James Walker? Do you know that doctor?
No, I do not.
And Dr. Mark Fisher, do you know him?
No, I do not.
Okay. And
They're not oral surgeons, because I'm the president of Nevada's Oral Surgeons, and I never heard of either one of those names.
But they were her treating trauma physicians.
Oh,
Did you see their...
Oh, I thought you meant the doctor like myself.
No, I mean the actual doctors who treated her. You don't know of them?
Yeah, I know of the names.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you defer to them and their opinions in regards to the fact that they got to see her, treat her, dealt with her face to face like you and I?
Right. I'm basically giving you my objective opinion on the material that had presented to me.
When you use the term objective, I mean, you're being paid $12,000 to be here.
Right.
Do you consider that objective?
It's based on factual. I'm looking at the radiographs, I'm looking at the hospital records. Yes.
You said that you didn't, when the pictures you saw, you didn't appear to be any swelling on her right eye. I'm showing you 109, and I'm going to zoom out for you, doctor.
Okay.
Are you saying that you didn't see any swelling to the right side of her face?
No, I said I didn't see it around her eye, which is, you could see the lids, and you could actually see that the iris is reflecting light.
Sure. If that is as far as her ability to open her eye, would you consider that swollen? If that's how much of her eye she could actually open?
I don't know. I'm not looking at her eye. I can only see a small portion of it.
Sure.
And looking at it, it doesn't look as bad as the left side.
No, but my question is to you, are you saying that there's no swelling there?
There appears to be some bruising, which may also have some swelling associated with it.
If that is as far as she's able to open her eye, would you consider that then swollen?
Yes.
What type of things can cause a blowout fracture that, like you were discussing?
It's blood force trauma to the cheekbone.
Okay. So,
It could be it could be a steering wheel. It could, people like turn their heads and have it's usually a punch though. Usually that's what it is. Because if there's that much force involved, usually the outside, the rim of the orbit will fracture.
now, some people can receive multiple hits to that area and there would be no fracture, correct?
It's possible.
Like if, let me ask you a question in regards to States 119. This eye looks pretty swollen. Looks pretty black and blue. Would you have expected there to be a fracture to that eye?
I couldn't tell you without an x-ray.
Okay. I'm going to represent to you that there is no fracture there.
Yeah.
So people can be hit one time or however many times that person was hit and there would be no fracture.
That's possible.
So that's why it makes it hard to guess how many punches there were, correct?
Right, I've said that.
Okay. Well, I'm a little unclear because you kept saying that coming back to 2 on direct, but as you said here on cross, you have absolutely no clue how many times that woman was hit.
No, when I was specifically talking, I outlined the fact that the nature and the type of these injuries could easily be done with one blow each. That was my...
And I believe you also used the term, and that the punches would have been done in rapid succession.
I never said that.
The question from Mr. Lederman asked specifically 2 punches and in rapid succession. There's absolutely no way.
I can't
Objection, Your
tell.
Honor, misstates the testimony.
Judge, those were the direct words from Mr. Lederman, rapid succession.
That was his question.
That wasn't my
That was
words.
not the answer.
Okay, can
That
you,
misstates his testimony.
you didn't answer that part of the question then, did you?
If you could read it back to me, I'll tell you what I said. I don't...
We don't have readbacks on this
Yeah,
department.
I don't want to tell you that rapid succession was any part of my answer.
Because that's impossible, right?
I can't really tell. I can't really tell from the nature of the materials that I reviewed how the punches were administered, whether they be in rapid succession or one blow each. I can't tell you.
No matter what records you were ever, any records, would you ever be able to look at records and show if punches happened 1, 2, 3, or 1, break, 2,
No.
break?
You
Not
could
something you can do.
Right.
The injuries to the lacerated liver and the leg, I believe you stated on direct that that's not your area of expertise.
It's not my, I know about it, but it's not my expertise.
And in regards to whether that was a serious lacerated liver, a not serious lacerated liver, do you have an opinion in regards to that?
I read it was a grade 3 liver laceration, which means that there was a disruption of the capsule for 3 centimeters. I know that from just working in the biz.
So at the end of the day, as you sit here today, the injuries that you saw in Ms. McInday could be consistent with being hit twice,
It's very possible.
and it could be consistent with being hit 20 times.
It's very possible.
Thank you so much. That concludes my cross-examination.
Redirect?
Yes. There's a difference, you would agree, in the words possible versus likely?
Yes.
Okay. So we had talked before about the reason the injury is being consistent with 2 hits is because they're only in 2 specific areas. Yes?
Yes.
And the damage created by the middle punch is consistent with the nose and the teeth is consistent with what I've called a middle punch or
Yes.
center of the face punch.
Yes.
And the injuries, the orbital blowout and the cheekbones are consistent with one punch to the cheek.
It can be.
Okay. And what you had said is that, I don't know if we went into this. Were there any other injuries outside of those to the head or to the head, face? I know there's a poke mark to the ear and a laceration to the scalp. Not those 2. But were there any injuries consistent with blunt force trauma?
Blunt force trauma?
Other than the 2 areas?
In the facial pictures that I saw, that appears that that's the blunt force trauma that I could comment on with any degree of certainty as an expert.
Okay. If Ms. McInday was punched, over here on the, top of the forehead, beginning of the hair, you would expect redness, bruising, something like
Something.
that to be in the pictures?
Yes,
And likewise, if she was hit, on her ear or on her chin, you would expect there to be something there?
yes. I did note that there was a laceration in the scalp on the side, like above the ear, if that's what you're referring to.
Yes, is that consistent with perhaps a knife blade?
It could be consistent with several things.
All
It's
right.
hard to say.
All right, but not necessarily a punch.
It could be that possibly somebody moved their head and the person had a ring on and a false skin. I'm not sure.
All right. So in terms of likely, we had talked about, based upon the injuries, the person receiving them would have had to have had hits in the same exact area. Yes?
It would be unlikely that somebody would remain still enough to receive the blunt force trauma on the same areas repeatedly.
Would you expect someone with these types of injuries to lose consciousness?
It's possible.
Okay. To what degree is it possible? Likely or
Unlikely.
unlikely?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it likely or possible that someone's going to experience confusion, memory loss, inability to recall large sections of time?
It's possible. They're stunned from the incident.
And oh God. And would you expect a trained fighter, boxing training, professional mixed martial artist, and a smaller individual, that the impact of the force would be consistent with one punch each, one to the middle and one to the right side?
Objection vague, I apologize, I have no idea.
Sorry, can you rephrase the question?
Sure. Let's presume the individual punching has boxing training and is a professional fighter, mixed martial artist. And the person receiving the blows is smaller than he is. Would you consider those injuries that you've previously described to be consistent with two punches?
Yes.
And if that person, boxer, was continuing to punch in that same area, would you expect the injuries to be much more extensive than they were here?
If it's the same area, yes.
And again, you didn't see evidence of any other area on the face being hit, correct?
If there was some like dried blood all over that could, because she wasn't cleaned up, there could have been under the dried blood other injuries that I could not see until she's completely cleaned up.
Okay, what would those injuries be?
It could be punctures or lacerations or,
But not from a fist, from something like a knife or...
it's possible.
It's not as heavily consistent with blunt force trauma.
No.
Whereas the injuries that you saw were blunt force trauma.
The
Was that a bad question?
sort of. The injuries to the orbital floor and the nasal bones and teeth were consistent with blunt force trauma.
And you reviewed the medical records in this case, yes?
I reviewed the records from Sunrise Hospital.
All right. And they didn't note any punctures or anything under the blood?
No.
All right. So there were no other injuries, even though it was possible there could be.
On
Yeah.
the face?
There weren't any other injuries on the face noted in the Sunrise records?
No, not that I was familiar with after reviewing the records.
All right, and the doctors there are competent enough to note the injuries if there were any?
Yes.
Now, are you guessing at these injuries, or are you using the best of your experience to be able to explain them based upon the records?
Are you asking me the mechanism of injury or the injury itself?
No,
They
the-
speak for themselves. They're obviously a blowout fracture of the left orbital floor, avulsion of tooth number 8 and luxation of tooth number 9. There's some chips on the teeth, and there's some nasal bone, comminuted nasal bone fractures, and the vomer's fracture. That's based on objective findings, facts.
All right, and again, if those were more than 2 very hard hits, they were going to be more extensive than that.
It's possible.
Okay. Well, it's possible, is that a guess, or is that based on your experience?
Based on my experience, I've seen people look worse, if that's what you're asking, with other injuries or other mechanisms of injuries.
Objection, non-responsive, move to strike.
No, overall.
Okay. In terms of the evidence, as you've reviewed it objectively, are these injuries on the face more consistent with 2 hits, or more consistent with of significant force, or more consistent with 10 or more hits to the same area?
I can't really decide that.
All right, but the hits, in fact, would have had to be to exactly the same area?
Because of those 2 locations having the majority of injury, yes.
All right, and if they deviated, by more than an inch or 2, you would see other evidence of injuries?
You would think that you would see other areas.
So let's assume someone's knocked down on the floor, and the person punching is over them. They would have to hit the exact same area over and over again to keep the injuries as they were?
Yes.
And did you see any injuries throughout the records over Miss McInerney's body that were consistent with a 2-hour beating?
I wouldn't know.
Okay. Did you noted the thigh bruise? Yes?
Yes.
And the lacerated liver? Yes?
Yes.
And no broken ribs? Yes?
Yes.
Did you see any other red marks, welts, broken bones, other than the knife punctures? Did you notice any of that?
Just what I saw in the photographs.
Okay. And also what was noted in the medical records?
Yes.
All right. And they would have noted, if she was down on all fours and wailed on in the back, they would have noted a welt, a bruise, redness, something like that?
Yes.
May I have 1 second?
Yes.
All right, I had forgotten on direct to go into an issue regarding the tooth. Did you review some pictures of a chipped tooth?
Yes.
All right, is that consistent with going into a dashboard without some type of deviation or projectile on it?
Objection made, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
I can ask it.
Rephrase.
Significantly better. A regular and smooth dashboard without anything on it. Is that chipped tooth consistent with going into the dashboard like that?
The dashboard was not as part of this particular group of photos.
Right, but I gave you, I see.
Well,
Well,
he gave you a hypothetical.
assume a smooth
Oh,
dashboard.
yeah. Well, if first of all, a dashboard is created to resist types of injuries, including airbags, what have you. But if there happens to be a piece of metal or a part of the dashboard that's projecting out, it's easy.
Okay. And if there isn't, it's not so easy.
And if there isn't, it's not so easy.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor. Pass the witness.
Ross?
Thank you. You said that you had reviewed the medical records from Sunrise, correct?
Yes.
In those medical records, did you see states 187, and let me kind of get the lights fixed down for you, that documented all of the locations to all of the injuries? Did you see this?
Yes.
And so you saw where it was documented the multiple contusions in different places to the front of the face, and then some abrasions and erythema to the back of the head, correct?
Yes,
And when we use the term erythema, that usually means redness or discoloration.
that's correct.
Okay. Now, Mr. Lederman was asking you some questions, and that was the injuries to the nose and the mouth, which I'm going to show you in states 105. Mr. Lederman asked you if it was consistent, those injuries could have come from one punch, and you said that that's possible.
Yes, it's possible.
Is it possible that those could have come from more than one punch?
Yes, it's possible.
And then, do you have any idea how soon after these pictures were taken after the event?
I assume that's like when she hit the door, because usually the nurses clean up the patients pretty quickly.
But did you have any idea, like the time frame in which?
They weren't time-stamped.
Okay, so you have no idea. For instance, swelling usually takes some time to happen, correct?
Yes.
And bruising takes some time to happen, correct?
Yes.
So maybe after, let's say, 24 hours, would that be more helpful in looking at those photographs to see, you know, where bruising ended up, where swelling ended up, etc.?
24 hours later, I would think that the swelling can distort and be covering a greater area of space, which it would be more difficult to delineate the exact area that it was hit
Okay.
versus having a immediate photograph.
So let me ask this. So you said, you know, if, let's say if Ms. McInday was punched in the head, you would have expected to see like a mark or something.
Yeah, usually there would be like an indentation from like the skin being disrupted, or it could be a laceration or a break in the skin.
But not all blows to the face cause disruption in skin.
Not always. Or there could be underlying bruising and things like that.
So and that's where I was going with in regards to the bruising. Sometimes it can take hours for a bruise to come out and show.
It can, but usually, like when someone has like a nasal fracture, it could be pretty quick. The onset of the bruising could be pretty quick because there's bleeding that takes place in the tissues. That's why the bruise occurs.
And what about to like, you know, the cheeks or the forehead? Would you expect to see those right away, or it just depends?
Yeah, you would see them, especially the lips. The lips swell up right away. People get fat lips from being hit right away.
Oh, yeah, and we can see in states 105, the lips are fairly swollen
They
there,
look pretty
correct?
swollen, yeah.
Thank you so much. Nothing further, Judge.
Regret?
No regret, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We are going to break for the evening. And for tomorrow, folks, we're going to start out at 1 in the